Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Liam, who's the author of The Closer's Edge. Liam, welcome to the program.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me.
You are welcome. I'm excited to talk to you about your brand new book, The Closer's Edge, because it's like we know in sales, ain't nothing happened until a sale is made. So you got to close sales. So I want to hear all about your perspective on sales and closing. But before we dive into that, give us a little bit of your story and your background, and that leads us into then why you wrote the book.
I appreciate that. Yeah, just simply, I started in the business way back in 1991. I was a young guy. I always make the joke. I think I was 23, 24. And I tell everybody I started out as everybody's grandson, or actually, that was the best way to go about it because I didn't have any experience. I just started. And so I had to take on that persona. Then eventually I became everybody's son, and now I'm everybody's brother. So after 35 years, the transition of where I am and where I'm doing now is different. But I sold for a long time. I was selling everything at one time, like Medicare and life insurance and annuities and car insurance, you name it, we had it. And the objective was to have so many things available that there's no way you couldn't make a sale, in that week. And then I had a young manager time, and he said, if you could focus on one thing, one direction, what would it be? And I said, well, annuities and life insurance are my two favorite things. And he said, well, throw everything else away, just focus on that. And my income quadrupled overnight. And so I focused on one thing. I focused on what I wanted to do, what I enjoyed. I can't remember who the person was that said it, but somebody once said that, if you like what you're doing, you never work a day in your life. And that's what I like about what I do and what I've done. I accumulated over 3,500 clients in a 25-year period. I wrote 365 clients a year for, I think, 10 straight years. I've done over 10 million in production. Used to do about 800,000 or 900,000 every week. When 2009 got here, I made some decisions to become a consultant, changed my career mindset a little bit, become an agency owner, not an FMO, but it's more like that. So I quit selling around then. And then around 2016, I had some health issues and things. So I had to retire and make some different choices in my life. And we did that. And I have about, I still do books. I still do training. I still do speaking. Matter of fact, I think we're speaking in Cincinnati here in a couple of weeks with a group. And then we've got some webinars and stuff that we do as well. I also have a Ruth Bucket system for agents that we do on our Facebook page, and people are welcome to join that. We have 7,500 agents in there. And then, of course, I do a lot of stuff with other groups and things like that. But the gist of it is I'm still in the industry. I tell people, somebody asked me today, matter of fact, Mike, they said, what do you do? I said, I do what I want when I want. So that's
That's a great position to be in, my friend. And I know that when we talk about sales and prospecting, it doesn't matter what industry that it is. There's some basic tenets and foundational principles that you need to understand about human psychology and the psychology of sales. So I'm excited to hear about what you've discovered. So at what point did you go, you know what? There's a book that needs to be written out here called The Closer's Edge. And you jump right from, like I said at the beginning, like closing is like that's the last thing. My personal, opinion is it's really, if you wanted to put parentheses, after the word closer's edge, it's really opener's edge because you're opening a relationship. It doesn't end with closing the sale, but I know we have to close the sale. Why did you write the book?
Well, I guess the better question would be is, what's the sequel? Because the sequel is the prospect edge, right? And so people say, why didn't you write the prospect edge first? And I said, well, because the closer's edge, you could have 1 million appointments, Mike, and if you can't close, it's not going to do you any good. So, yeah. and I get it. It's a fine line, closing and prospecting, but closing is where you make your money. Yes?
Yeah.
And so, the reason why I wrote the book was because, I guess the best way to answer that would be is I do so many lectures and I do a lot of webinars and we do a lot of question and answer, and I get it from both sides. I get it from brand new agents. I get it from a lot of the veteran agents, and what's the best closing technique? How much should I spend on Facebook? What should I do for ads? How much should I put in? Well, what's about the old story where, if you spend money, you make money? And I'm against that. I don't believe that's true. I think it's what you spend your money on that makes you money. Yes. And so when I got all these questions from these people, I thought, maybe somebody needs to come out. I wrote the book on tax-free retirement, so why don't I write the book on closing? So I did it, and that's what we're doing, and we're hoping that people enjoy it.
I love it. Well, I'm looking at the table of contents, and you can't get to the close without prospecting. So chapter 1 is prospecting. And I'm confident that you are one that you want to go, you know what? Here's what everyone else says about prospecting, but here's what really to approach it. What are some of the basic ideas on prospecting you bring up? And then what sets apart your strategies from other books on prospecting?
Well, I think my biggest thing is that I'm a big believer in nobody reinvents the wheel, right? And I one of the things that I tell people that just because it can't be reinvented, it doesn't mean it can't be made better. And there, people say different things, and language is one way, and how you talk to people. I tell people that, Ziglar's. I'm a big fan of Zig Ziglar, and he used to say, if you call your wife a cat, you're going to get one response. If you call her a kitten, you're going to get another response. So how do we modernize that and then modernize it into the prospecting language and things like that? And I said, well, when I'm on stage or I'm performing, I use that same thing that he says about language and stuff and how to react. And I do it in a different way. I said, when I met my wife 15 years ago, and my wife's a very attractive woman. She's been she did some swimsuit contests and all that, really pretty lady. And when we first met, we were dancing, and I said to her, I just try to be funny, Mike. You know me, I'm always goofing. And I said, you dance like Pee Wee Herman. And
oh, no.
15 years later, she hasn't danced with me very often. And I thought that through. What if I would have said, you dance like Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction? Because it's the same dance, but it's a little different when you say that. Yes?
Interesting. Isn't that amazing? It's just a tiny little shift.
And that's where I try to tell people that prospecting can be the same thing. Everybody does it, maybe the same way, the different way. But what makes my prospecting techniques a little bit different is I like to take, young people, I like to take older guys, and I like to show them stuff. There's a lot of guys, a lot of gurus out there, a lot of young guys that are telling people that old school stuff doesn't work. And, I'm a huge believer, I'm a huge believer in the number one prospecting technique that you have is yourself. And I believe in ABC, always be closing. And people say, well, what do you do different about that? And I said, well, the difference that I do about it is that I try to treat people like as if I was a landscaper, for instance, or if I was a person that was building your patio in the back, or maybe I'm doing some other things, construction work. They always put a sign out front telling people in the neighborhood what they're doing. That's ABC. That's always be clear. They're letting the neighbors know what they do. So as a financial person, a real estate person, you can do the same thing. And you say, so when I go to someone's house, you put a sign in the front yard? No, I take my business card and I take it next door and I meet each neighbor on each side and each neighbor across the street. Or if they're coming into the office, right? I have them give me some names or whatever, some people that they think I should be able to maybe send my book to or send an induction to or whatever. But to me, the most powerful close in the world is letting people know what you do.
Yep, 100%. And I think that is so powerful to be able to think ahead of time about those ways you position yourself in that prospecting and the talk and turning prospects into clients. That really makes a great first impression, because I would venture to say that there's a lot of people out there, prospects that have had salespeople approach them that are like a bull in a china closet. But when you do some of the things you're talking about and pre-plan some of those talks and, gently bring up questions or perspectives, that first impression is totally different when they talk to someone trained like what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think I think the biggest thing people have to understand is the biggest part of selling and prospecting is listening. And I just don't think enough of that happens. The two words that I used and were taught to me, and it turned me into probably the best salesman ever, was shut up.
Yeah.
And I'm going to we got cups coming out with the book, because I always say yes, yes. And so we got the yes mugs coming out. But one of my agents said, why don't you have a cup that says shut up, so we constantly remember that? You know what I mean?
You know, I've been around sales training for decades, and you hear that a lot, and it makes total sense. Like, you use that silence so that the prospector is really thinking. But I would, that's one of the hardest things ever, because you want to make sure they understand everything, and you want to make sure they understood this point and that point and making this thing. So being able to just be quiet and let people sit with their thoughts, it makes so much sense. It is so powerful, but it is so hard to do, right?
And that's why you have to, I'm a big believer in practice. When this is not really about closing, it's about speaking. But when I did my mom's funeral, I did my mom's funeral 10 times before I went out and did her funeral. And I tell people it's the same thing when you're doing sales. Practice 10 times before you go out. Practice with another sales partner. Practice with your manager. Practice with your wife. And then when you're finished, when you come out, one of the other mistakes I think people make in the closing side of the business is, as soon as you leave that house, go get you a cup of coffee, a Coke, whatever. Within 15 minutes, you should be sitting down and dissecting what exactly happened in that interview. What did I do wrong? What could have I done better? What did I do right? Those type of things. I think if you do that in the aspect and again, none of that's going to matter if you didn't listen to the client, right? And you're absolutely right, Mike. One of the things that we do a lot of times when I'm training people, I say, I tell them, stop. Everybody stops. Well, I'm talking. I said, nobody say a word. And I let them see how long 10 seconds is. Mike, that's a long time, but it really isn't. But that's what messes them up, right? They can't get to the 10-second without saying something. And if you learn to be able to do that, you're going to be one step ahead of everybody else.
So you said another word, listen, and I want to go a little bit deeper there, because just like the 10-second exercise you just said, I think let's go a couple layers deeper on this listening thing, because it made me think of something that I think is super important, and I'm confident, teach on this and can take it to another perspective, which is this. You don't want to be the person nod your head, smiling, listening, but your mind is waiting for the very split second opening to make your point, and you're not really listening. You need to listen and understand and hear so that you can use their information and in the next steps of your conversation, make it seamlessly flow. Don't just smile and nod and just, you're not even hearing what they're saying because you're waiting for an opening to say your next point.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem in any kind of communication. It's not, I tell people all the time, you can hear somebody, but it doesn't mean you're actually listening, right? They're just waiting for their turn to talk. And then when you do that, you're missing all the things you need to talk about. And I think a lot of times the client will give you everything you need if you just let them, right? And then you have to mirror it right back at them. Mike, I noticed you're saying that, you told me that, in our list, our second of conversation there, that you have a real need or a real, and then I just go into what you just said and I throw it back at you, right? It's almost like, where they used to teach us back in the day that if somebody crosses their arms, they're telling you they don't want you. That kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Same thing could be done with listening.
100%. So, what do you feel? What is your approach on objections? And where I'm going with it is this. I know that you mentioned Zig Ziglar. I'm a big Zig fan and saw him live when he was still living and got many of his books. And I'm confident that on my bookshelf, I've got the Zig Ziglar book on, overcoming objections. Do you feel like it's best to be prepared to overcome objections, or to have in your conversation / presentation things that overcome known objections before they even come up?
Well, that would be my the way I do it is that I give them the objection before they give it to me. In other words, a lot of times, you can do it a couple different ways. Like when I do seminars, for instance, when I first come out into seminar, right when I close, right when I start my seminar, the very first things out of my mouth are, listen, there's three things that are going to happen today. Three types of people that are here. One person really has some needs. One person wants a second opinion, and just to eat. And they start laughing, and then I say, here's how we're going to do this. Every one of you have a sheet where you're going to be able to fill out, and you're going to be able to cover all the things I'm going to cover. I may not cover things that you came to see, so make sure you write that down. And then at the end of the thing, I tell them, again, I haven't even began my presentation. I'm already telling them I'm going to set appointments. Make sure that you put yourself in the box, in the yellow box down there, when you want me to see you, what time, your phone number, all that kind of stuff. And so I do that, but I do the same thing when I go in and I'm just doing a one-on-one, or they're coming into the office. I always say, listen, I say, Mike, there's three things that are going to happen tonight. You're going to say yes, no, or I want to think about it. Yes? And then
Yeah.
they said, yeah. But I said, well, Mike, I'd like you to say yes, but you might very well say no. What I don't want you to say, and what's not going to be allowed to be said, is I want to think about it. Okay. And the reason why, Mike, is because you're either telling me one of two things. I didn't do a very good enough job and you don't understand, or, right, you said that to me because you just aren't in a position where you can do anything. You're just not, you're basically saying no in a nice way. Yes. And so let's make sure, Mike, that we're clear on that. Now, he's still going to say it at the end, and I get that, but I've already addressed it. Yes. And then the second number one that I always get is that it's too expensive, right? And that to me is the easiest one, because it's like, well, Mike, the whole reason we're doing this is to get you in a position where if something does happen in your life, there'll be some funds or things available for your family. So when you really say this, it's too expensive, you're actually saying that you really can't afford not to do this. Let's just figure out a way to make it happen. What's going to be the best way that we can still get what you need and still do it in a way that it's going to solve your problem?
And also when you know the known typical objections, and in your presentation conversation, you're like, a lot of people think, or a lot of people are worried about, and what we do is, and you're almost getting in the mind of that prospect going, yeah, darn, I was thinking of the same thing. And so you're connecting on a deeper level. You are overcoming an objection so that it's not friction. And then maybe if they do have a little bit of a pushback kind of a thing, you're only handling one versus several.
Yeah, and everybody does it different. I mean, one of the things that I don't like to do, and I've done it, but it's never worked out, is when one of the two spouses doesn't show up. Now, I've heard arguments on both sides where, sometimes if they're doing a process or they're gathering information, it's fine. Okay, that's good. But in my case, if the other spouse isn't there, it's telling me one of two things. He doesn't pull the trigger, or she doesn't pull the trigger, or they would be there. Secondly, I'm going to have to re-explain it all over again when and if she comes back to the table. But I would say in my 35 years, I would say almost 100% of the time, you never get another interview because she wasn't there to begin with, or he wasn't there to begin with.
Yep. That's a good point. So now we've kind of done some good prospecting. We've understood how to phrase some of our talk and make that first impression. We've presented and overcome objections before they come up. Now we're at the point of the close. What are some of the points that people need to bring it home and make that sale happen?
Well, so a lot of times the close, everybody has to fill out, in most cases, an application or some sort of paperwork. And so it all depends on that process. Like if you're an insurance salesman, the easiest way to get the paperwork started is say, Mike, everything, I've got everything over here. This is the way you wanted to go, Susie, you like this, and I'm just reiterating what we've done. I said, now I got to ask you one important question, and especially in life insurance, who is going to be the beneficiary? Now I'm guessing that you'll be hers and her be you, but here's the big question: who's going to be the contingent beneficiary? Mike, do you know what a contingent? No, what is that? Well, what happens is if you two are together more now than any, because you're married. And so there's a likelihood that you could die at the same time. And if that happens, you got to make sure you have somebody else that can receive the funds, or it's going to go into probate or estate, and it becomes a problem. So we always want to have a contingent beneficiary. So we start with that. And that's one way to get the close going. The other way that you do it is that you can say, everything's finished, and say, Mike, this is one of the great things I like about this. And let's say I'm doing a car, or I'm doing real estate or whatever. You can just say, listen, you get to pick what day of the month you want this payment to come out, and you want it to be the 5th, the 15th. Again, I'm giving them the dates. I'm not giving them an out. You don't give them an out. You want. I'm not saying, Mike, we got to do a date here. You want a time to think about it? You don't say stuff like that. Yeah. It's all in applied consent, right? And then hopefully you've already handled all of the objections before you get to the close, right? I think the biggest part of the close is getting in front of the individual, and I think once you've done that, the rest of it should be relatively easy if you have everything in order and ready to go, and you can, of the stuff that they wanted to begin with to see you. Yes.
100%. And when you were explaining the contingency beneficiary example, made me think of you use two separate closing techniques bundled up into one, and it became really natural. You assume the sale, and you educated and taught a new piece of information so that it bonded even deeper with that prospect to go, now you do know what that is, right? Oh, well, that's what this is. And you assume that sales, okay, well, let's get going. And then you probably can pepper in a little bit of silence and shut up right there after you do that. And you just sit there and smile.
Yeah, and you know, the awkwardness, you know, sometimes, you know, can be, you know, a little bit, you know, I guess I would say daunting, but sometimes, again, if you're not a seasoned salesman, again, it's the 10-second rule. Just wait a minute.
Yeah.
It's fine. Everything's great. And if there's an objection, then you didn't do a good enough job. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad salesman. Doesn't mean you can't close, right? It just happens sometimes. You know, I tell people all the time that the sad thing about being a good closer is when you're brand new at closing and you're brand new at doing things, you almost, you know, miss the boat on the sense that you have to decide who is the client and who is the salesman. And and what I mean by that is when people start out, you know, I get a young agent, he'll come in here and say, man, I've been over there 4 times and all 4 times they didn't show up. Well, in my position, where I'm at in my career, I pick my clients. So
Yeah.
it wouldn't have been more than one time I went out there and they didn't show up or they stood me up for an appointment, right? And that's why I like having them come into the office, because if they don't show, I can still get work done. I don't lose 2 hours in between driving back and forth to a client. Yes. And so I like that part of it. But when a young agent makes that mistake, I said, listen, you always want to look at how the relationship starts. And if you're doing all of that to begin with, and I get it, these young guys, they got it. And they'll take pretty much anything. And I've been there. I know how it is. But you still have to get the habit of training your client the way things are going to be. And if you do not, you're going to have a rough time with that client. And I'm not so sure there'll be a long-lasting relationship.
I love it. Well, Liam, it's been such a pleasure to draw from your decades of experience and talk about closing. And I think this book, The Closer's Edge, is going to be so powerful for people to read through and implement. What's the best way that people can reach out to you and get a copy?
Well, the best way they can do it is they can go to theclosersedge.com/book. So it's theclosersedge.com/book. So that's the best way to get that. And there'll be other stuff, of course, on there for them as well.
Excellent. Well, Liam, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Thank you for having me, Mike. I appreciate it. You keep doing the good stuff you're doing. I know that you're a big help to a lot of people. And, you know, I know you're a humble guy, but I know I appreciate everything you've done for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.